We're going to bring the hearing to order. Ranking Member Gillibrand will be joining us, but in the interest of making sure we have time for both panels, thank you all for being here. The Senate Armed Services Subcommittee on Personnel meets this afternoon to receive testimony on military and civilian personnel programs and on military family readiness. We are fortunate today to have the Undersecretary of Defense for Personnel and Readiness and the Services Personnel Chiefs to discuss the Department's military and civilian personnel programs, and to have several important civilian witnesses to discuss military family readiness. On panel one, we will hear from the Honorable Robert Wilkie, Undersecretary of Defense and Personnel and Readiness, and actually a former colleague of mine in my office. Lieutenant General Thomas Siemens, Deputy Army Chief of Staff, Vice Admiral Robert Burke, the Chief of Naval Personnel, Deputy Chief of Naval Operations for Manpower Personnel Training and Education. Lieutenant General Gina Grosso, Deputy Air Force Chief of Staff for Manpower Personnel and Services, and Lieutenant General Michael Rocco, Deputy Marine Commandant, Manpower and Reserve Affairs. Thank you all for being here. I'll introduce the second panel during the transition. The recently released National Defense Strategy correctly states the creativity and talent of the American warfighter is our military's greatest enduring strength. Therefore, the topics this subcommittee will discuss today are vital to the health and effectiveness of our all-volunteer force. As the nation faces an increasingly complex global security environment, our military's personnel programs and policies must build on an agile and adaptable force capable of responding to the uncertain threats we face. A high-quality military and civilian workforce must appeal to this nation's best and brightest young people, provide greater stability and flexibility to service members in their professional and personal lives, and provide compensation commensurate with the level of responsibility inherent to a military career. As we do all of this, we can't lose sight of the military families who support our troops much better than any personnel policy ever could. Military families confront unique stressors and challenges which must be considered in any discussion of military personnel management. The Congress needs to understand military families' concerns and work diligently to ensure that the Department of Defense provides the support and the services families need. The readiness of our armed forces and ultimately our nation's security depends on it, because if the Defense Department fails to support military families, our volunteer service members will simply walk away. Finally, I look forward to hearing from Secretary Wilkie and the personnel chiefs about their efforts to improve recruitment and retention of military and civilian personnel, to improve military personnel and family readiness, to prevent sexual assault and harassment, to reduce service member and family suicides, to combat domestic violence and child abuse, and to enhance child care services, and finally to improve employment opportunities for military spouses. I hope the civilian witnesses on panel 2 will describe the challenges faced by military families and give us good ideas about how we can improve family readiness. I want to thank all the witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to hearing your testimony. I want to especially thank Senator Ernst. She's a frequent attender of subcommittees. I know she's got a lot of subcommittees today. She's bouncing in and out. And Senator Ernst, I would offer time for you to make any opening comment.
Certainly. This is a rare occasion since I'm not a chair or ranking member of this committee, but so I don't have any prepared statements, but I do want to thank you for being here today. And a number of questions that I have for later on if we get to those. Senator Tillis addressed most of them in his opening comments. One that I want to raise awareness on, and something that we do talk about, is recruitment of our forces, and how do we sustain readiness with an ever-decreasing population that will not meet the height weight standards to come into the service. Senator Tillis and I engaged in a ruck march last week, something we frequently do on the Hill.
Sergeant, it was cold.
It was, for a North Carolinian, it was cold. It was a beautiful day for Iowegian. But we were joined by Sergeant Major of the Army Daly, and we had a great discussion about recruiting young people, and we talked a lot about the benefits and opportunities that are extended to these young people. But the fact of the matter is we need a pipeline of people coming into the service. And I had some physical education teachers from Iowa in this morning, and they stated that 71% of our students will not be able to qualify for military service because they're simply not ready coming out of high school because of those height weight standards. So I'm not suggesting that we need to lower standards at all. I think we keep the standard, but what we have to do is focus on that pipeline and make sure that if they want to serve, they are ready to serve as they exit high school. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Ernst. Ranking Member Gillibrand.
There we go. As we begin our review of DoD's military and civilian personnel budgets and programs, I remain concerned about the pace of accessing and assigning women into all military occupations and units that were previously denied to them. It has been 2 years now since the Secretary of Defense and the Obama administration lifted the remaining restrictions. A lot of progress has been made, but we must be vigilant that occupational standards remain rooted in everyday requirements of military duty as required by law to ensure an equal playing field for all, and that we field the best possible military we can and recruit and retain the best people. Second, I applaud the department and you, Mr. Wilkie, for finally publishing a uniform anti-harassment policy applicable to all uniformed military members required by the 2013 Defense Bill, which is nearly 5 years late. I have some questions about what you choose to include and what is not included in the policy, and I understand that the next steps, which you're working on, is a policy for the department's civilian and contractor workforces. I'm also interested in hearing about your efforts to curb retaliation against those who report sexual assault and harassment within the ranks. The reported retaliation rate against survivors has consistently been around 60%, which is deeply troubling. An area that we have not talked about sufficiently is intimate partner violence and child abuse. This came to the forefront last year with the shooting by Devin Patrick Kelly in Texas. In that instance, the system failed in keeping a gun out of his hands, and I know that the services have been looking at how this had happened and working to ensure that it doesn't happen again. But a less reported data point I think is staggering is that in fiscal year 2016, there were 13,916 reports of suspected incidents of child abuse and neglect, and horribly 18 child abuse-related fatalities. All of the deceased victims were under 5 years old, and half of them were under 1 year old. In addition, there were 9 spouse or intimate partner fatalities. Unfortunately, we do not have prevalence data for these crimes, but the data that is out there suggests to me that we should be paying more attention to this issue. So I'm grateful to Senator Tillis for agreeing to hold a hearing devoted to intimate partner violence and child abuse next month. In terms of the department's budget request, the fiscal year 18 request for military personnel, including health care, totaled $180 billion. This year's request is $187 billion. I look forward to hearing from our government witnesses where these additional funds would be used in order to increase military family readiness. I do have to say, however, that I'm extremely disappointed that even with $85 billion in additional funding provided by the budget deal passed by Congress, that the President has proposed freezing the pay of federal civilian workforce, half of whom work within DoD and its services. I believe this is short-sighted, unnecessary, and will further erode morale and trust among our civilian employees. Thank you, Senator Tillis, for including the second panel today, which is the focus of a military families program. I'm especially pleased to welcome Dr. J. Michael Haney from Syracuse University's Institute for Veterans and Military Families, which he leads, and which has done some very important work supporting military families, post-service employment, and financial readiness. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
We'll just share this mic. Senator Kaine has joined us. Senator Kaine is not on the subcommittee, but I understood yesterday that he was talking about stepping in. So, Senator Kaine, before we receive testimony from the first panel, if you'd like to make some comments, we'll recognize you at this time.
I want to thank the chair and the ranking, and thanks to witnesses and colleagues for forbearance on this. I am the ranking on the readiness subcommittee, and we're meeting around the corner. And so I wanted to just make brief comments on a readiness and personnel matter, and then race back. Family readiness, which is so critical to personnel, but to the entire military mission. I firmly believe that family readiness, and specifically military spouse unemployment, is a military readiness issue. I have a child in the military who recently is married, and so now I'm experiencing the discussions about this issue in a different way than I have before. But I hear about it from folks all over the Commonwealth, and I'm sure it's the same for all my colleagues. They hear about it in their state. Military families face significant financial strain, insecurity, and sacrifice because of having single incomes, or also because of the frequent moves. And this places an enormous strain on the force. I think we've often heard our military leaders testify in the full hearings that often it's the service member that makes the decision to enlist, but whether somebody stays or not is most often a family decision. So we need to focus on retaining top talent. Military life will never be easy on those who serve their families, but while we can't make military service easy, sometimes we can lighten the burden on families and make it a little bit more doable. Within the last 2 weeks, I introduced Senate S2379, the Military Spouse Employment Act, and I want to thank Senators Gillibrand, Murray, and Perdue for being co-sponsors of the legislation. Truly bipartisan. It's been introduced in a bipartisan way on the House side as well. Spouses are facing unemployment rates at least 3 times higher than the national average, and some surveys have that rate as 7 times higher. And the only reason there's a range is we haven't cared enough about the figure to really accurately measure it. We do measure veterans' unemployment rate very well through the Department of Labor, but military spouse unemployment hasn't been a priority, and so the measures are more difficult and they have to be done via survey. When we saw collectively similar rates among veterans, a veteran's unemployment rate higher than the national average in the late 2008, 9, 10, 11 space, we did a bunch of things together with society, and then the veterans' unemployment rate of Iraq and Afghan war vets actually dropped down to be now below the national average. That's good. So if we were able to do it there with some persistent attention, I think we can do it here too. And I hope we can make a similar effort connected to the NDA this year to take this really talented, resilient workforce of military spouses and help them tackle the challenge. The bill that I passed, which I hope we'll be discussing during the NDAA, came from stories that I heard around Virginia and basically kind of falls into 4 pillars. First, assistance with direct hiring, to the extent that we can use expedited hiring into federal jobs. We sometimes do that for veterans. We can do it for military spouses too. Often the best jobs around military bases are other federal jobs, either DoD civilian or other federal agencies. Second, training. The MyCAA career advancement account can be used by spouses, but we found a whole lot of people don't really know about the account, and there's even some uses of it we think we can expand. So it's one thing to use that account to take a course to advance your employability, but how about using the account to pay for a credential if you move from one state to the next and you're a teacher, real estate agent, lawyer, cosmetologist, and you need to get a new credential? How about using the CAA account to re-credential or re-register? Third, counseling. The Military OneSource offers counseling resources for staff, for service members and spouses after the transition, but we heard from a lot of folks that the 6-month availability of these resources, career coaching, counseling, was just too quick to help some people in the transition. That 6 months comes fast. The transition isn't done. We can extend that for a year. And then finally, there are transition assets on military bases, transition assistance program that are now guaranteed access for military service member, but not guaranteed access for spouses. And since transition is a family matter, we think we ought to guarantee spouses access to those resources as well. There's a lot to it. The nice thing is this is a matter that I know there's not a partisan issue to, and it's my hope that in whether it's tackling it on the readiness side or in the personnel side as we go through the NDA process this year, this bipartisan idea might find favor with the committee. And Mr. Chair, I thank you, and Senator Gillibrand, thanks so much for being a co-sponsor of the bill. Thanks for letting me interrupt, and you're actually going to hear from some witnesses in panel too who have been very instrumental in helping us realize what we need to do in this area, and I thank them for their help. Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Kane. Secretary Wilkie, welcome. And we'll then move from right to left on opening statements from the personnel service chiefs. Secretary Wilkie.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, Senator Gillibrand, and Senator Ernst. As you said, Mr. Chairman, this is a bit of a homecoming for me, and I can never begin to repay the senators here and my colleagues on the staff for your kindness to me through the years. I also want to thank you for your Herculean efforts on behalf of our troops to provide them stable and predictable funding for our operations for the next 2 years. Mr. Chairman, during my nomination hearing, you charged me with making life easier for the men, women, and families who carry our future on their shoulders. And since my confirmation, I am happy to report that the role of personnel and readiness has not only changed to make that charge real, but it has changed to provide a wider use of personnel issues as we inform the National Defense Strategy. Secretary Mattis first laid out 3 Department of Defense priorities in the new National Defense Strategy. One is rebuilding military readiness as we build a more lethal joint force. 2, strengthening alliances as we attract new partners. And 3, reforming the department's business and family practices for greater performance. P&R has a role in all of these areas. The Secretary has also given us new responsibilities for the strategic readiness of the force. He has instructed us to address resource gaps in capabilities, readiness, and the capacity to project power in globally contested environments. He has charged us with updating readiness goals in line with the NDS, working with the Joint Staff and Services to establish a standardized demand signal to determine the force is essential to address future warfighting scenarios. He has also tasked us with implementing a readiness recovery framework that includes a plan on specific military service identified areas for improvement, such as maintenance, access to training, sufficient manpower, depot maintenance, and the time needed to plan, coordinate, and execute readiness across the services. As I mentioned last year, the Department has too often been caught up in chasing a shiny object, like the new carrier or the new fighter. We have forgotten many of the family issues that make our all-volunteer force work. But we have also forgotten the service members on the front line. The front line is where 80 to 90% of the casualties occur. It is where the human dimension of conflict is its most bloody. It is a world that is brutal and unforgiving, and a world in which the grim reality now is that the enemy is catching up and exploiting areas of weakness. The Israeli Defense Force experienced that in Lebanon against Hezbollah in 2006. We have experienced it against foes in Iraq and Afghanistan, and now look to a world where threats are proliferating from North Korea, China, Russia, and Iran. Our goal in reassessing the way we carry the fight to deter and, if need be, defeat any enemy is to make sure that our soldiers, sailors, airmen, and Marines get home alive quickly and get home quickly to their families. What does that mean? It means no more fair fights. That means overmatching our enemies. That means providing our troops with the same level of investment and scholarly attention that we do with the billion-dollar programs that tend to grab headlines across the country. Mr. Chairman, as I mentioned at my nomination hearing, this is not the military that Chairman McCain or my father joined at the dawn of the Kennedy administration. Yet we are still faced with policies and procedures in place then to run that force of multiple millions, refreshed each year by tens of thousands of draftees and thousands of ROTC graduates. Today, our military is vastly different. It is comprised entirely of high-quality volunteers. And as Senator Gillibrand noted, 17% of the force is female, many of them serving on the front lines in numbers and missions unimaginable in the days of the Women's Army Corps. Yet we still rely on a 20-year up-or-out model for service members who are forced to leave the military in their prime. Promotion models often see the bottom performer advanced at the same pace as the front runner. Success in the information age will increasingly rely on the technical ability of our troops, yet our assignment system values breadth over depth of experience. Recruiting is often stovepipe and not reaching a wider audience online. Our service members cannot move freely amongst active Guard and Reserve components to meet changing circumstances in their lives. As part of a holistic talent management strategy, I am working with the services and will work with you to ensure that our legislative authorities and policies meet these requirements and the requirements laid out by the Secretary of Defense in the National Defense Strategy. Our families, as I mentioned, are our priority as well. In my father's day, very few service members had families. Today, almost 70% do. For our families, the military health system has been slow to keep up with modern medical advances for conditions like autism, as the chairman and ranking member have often pointed out, and other behavioral disorders. The department will continue to enhance and provide DoD support for military families with special medical or educational needs through the ongoing Exceptional Family Member Program standardization, with oversight and analysis of policy implementation, increased communication of available resources, and continuous process improvement. We still have military families making their medical appointments on paper, and P&R, in accord with the direction of this committee, is consolidating our military health care systems into one streamlined and efficient military health care administration. Constant rotation, again based on a 19th century Army model and an issue addressed in Senator Kane's recent legislation, causes stress on our force. It prevents families from putting down roots and spouses from garnering meaningful employment. We are mindful of this and are undertaking a review of ways in which we can mitigate those stresses through greater stability, particularly at large post camps and stations, locations where stability can be balanced with the readiness imperative for service members' professional development. We are also reviewing our child care services and will implement strategies to improve access to and the quality of Department of Defense provided child care across our services. The bottom line is that readiness is holistic, and if the families are not happy, the soldier walks. Importantly, we have finally provided our members with a comprehensive anti-harassment and bullying policy as instructed by this committee over 6 years ago. To mark the seriousness of this endeavor, I have instructed the elevation of the DoD Office of Resiliency to include the Sexual Assault Prevention and Response Office to be a direct report to me, so that it is no longer lost within the layers of the Pentagon's bureaucracy. This office will be responsible for department policy and enforcement on sexual assault, harassment, suicide prevention, and equal opportunity. Mr. Chairman, the all-volunteer force has performed miracles, but certain communities within the Joint Force are still deploying at a higher rate than desired, and in some cases, their current deploy-to-dwell rate is not sustainable to achieve our readiness recovery goals. We must address those hard facts, or the force will break. One way we address this is to ensure our service members are performing warfighting operations, while we rely on our civilian workforce to meet support missions that enhance our military's readiness. To that effort, I am reviewing not only how the department can optimize staffing at our shipyards, hospitals, and especially our headquarters, but how we can hire the right people to make them accountable to perform at the highest level. Mr. Chairman, this committee has kept faith with the finest military in the world, and the solutions for many of the issues I have mentioned have already begun to be put in place by you. I pledge P&R to continue to build upon your work and help you keep that faith. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Secretary. Thank you. General Rocco.
Chairman Tillis, Ranking Member Gillibrand, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to discuss your Marine Corps. Your 186,000 Marines are the foundation of the Corps. They are the Corps' most critical resource and always will be. Marines are recruited, trained, and educated and retained to win our nation's battles. They are smart, resilient, fit, disciplined, and able to overcome adversity. Marines are warfighters. They are lethal and they are ready. Recruiting high-quality men and women and retaining those whose past service and future potential continues to make the Corps stronger and is our highest priority. Our Marines ensure that we will be no better friend to our allies and those we have come to help, and no worse enemy to those who oppose us. We will meet our recruiting missions again this year. while at the same time exceeding all quality goals. The department requires 90% of Marine enlistees to be in the top education tier. We are over 99%. It requires 60% of enlistees to be in the highest mental aptitude group. We are over 72%. Just as we recruit the best, so must we retain the best. The Marines are capable of fulfilling our leadership roles and operational requirements. There is a continuous challenge to keep high-quality Marines in the service, especially in the current economy and increasingly competitive civilian job market. This is particularly true for cyber and many of the other high-tech occupations that are of critical and enduring importance. Incentive pays and bonuses remain vital to our retention effort, and we appreciate your continued support. We are open to and always assessing new ways to recognize, reward, and ultimately retain quality Marines in the Corps. The Commandant's top priority in this regard is to increase lineal list flexibility for our officer promotions. We believe that this is a simple, yet very real and effective way to recognize excellence. We look forward to working with all of the services, the Department, and members of this subcommittee and other initiatives that will enhance personnel quality, readiness, and lethality. We must remain adaptable and consider new ways to recruit and retain the high-tech force we need for the future as we build on the foundation of the quality Marines we have today. I look forward to answering your questions. Thank you.
Thank you. General Grosso.
Chairman Tillis, Ranking Member Gillibrand, Senator Ernst, thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to deliver the United States Air Force's personnel posture for fiscal year 2019. Increasing end strength is the Air Force's #1 priority to accelerate readiness. We appreciate the FY18 National Defense Authorization Act support for continued end strength growth to 675,000 total force airmen. This growth allows the Air Force to compete, deter, and win in a more competitive and dangerous international security environment. The Air Force's FY19 President's budget continues that growth to 680,000 total force airmen. This end strength growth increases training capacity to address foundational disconnects in the training pipeline. It also funds instructors to boost pipeline capacity and increases intelligence, remotely piloted aircraft operations support, and cyber mission capability. As of October 2017, our total force pilot shortage was approximately 2,000, with the largest shortage in our fighter pilot inventory. The FY19 President's budget continues to address the pilot shortage by funding increased pilot production capacity. This increased capacity assists in rapidly producing new pilots to meet operational requirements. In addition, the budget funds implementation of myriad programs and policies designed to address assignment, operational tempo, and quality of life issues targeted to improve pilot retention. The FY19 President's budget increases support to airmen and families through a variety of capabilities that drive mission readiness by focusing on resiliency and retention. The budget increases child and youth funding by $54 million for a total of $114 million. This funding will expand child care for those airmen needing care outside of normal duty hours, provides fees to support 4,000 children who only have access to off-base child care, and funds youth resiliency camps. The Exceptional Family Member Program assists more than 33,000 airmen who have special needs family members. This budget adds 15 installation-level family support coordinators across the Air Force and also funds increasing respite child care for primary caregivers from 12 to 40 hours per child per month. Taking care of our airmen's children and caregivers removes worries and distractions to allow the airmen to fully focus on the mission. Today's threat environment requires agile and inclusive military and civilian personnel management systems to ensure the Air Force continues to retain the highly skilled, talented talent needed to defend our nation. In our enlisted force, we are conducting a triennial review of enlisted evaluation process following the transition to a new system in 2015. Within our officer corps, we are looking into options to enhance the Air Force's ability to execute the right size and mix of capabilities required to meet and sustain emerging mission demands. We are reviewing multiple initiatives to include exploring the possibility of modifying our current promotion competitive category structure and establishing technical tracks. We fully support the Defense Officer Personnel Management Act reform efforts, in particular opting out of promotions, constructive credit, merit-based promotions, and secretarial authority for a small number of spot promotions. We look forward to continuing the discussions on this topic with you. Our civilian workforce is essential to the Air Force's mission in joint warfighting readiness. Recruiting and hiring top civilian talent is critical to our success. In FY18, we implemented a premier college intern program. This initiative enables the Air Force to recruit top talent directly from college campuses via summer intern program starting their junior year, using direct hire authorities to streamline the process. Our target for FY19 onboarding is 500 new civilians, and we currently have 450 acceptances to date. This approach ensures we will leverage the new congressional hiring authorities and stay competitive with aggressive private sector recruiting. Finally, the Air Force is modernizing the information technology infrastructure across our human resource systems to provide exceptional personnel service to airmen and their families. In a digitally connected world, our airmen deserve the best human resource systems available today. We have a 6-year plan to migrate 115 technology platforms and 400-plus applications to the cloud. As we modernize our information technology platforms, we will provide more modern systems for our airmen, and we will enhance our ability to make data-driven decisions. In conclusion, we must ensure our airmen have the resources, training, and tools to compete, deter, and win in an increasingly complex world. We are committed to prioritizing and resourcing what is most important to make the Air Force more ready and lethal. We welcome the opportunity to partner with Congress in our endeavors to protect and defend our nation. I thank you for your continued support, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Admiral Bart.
Chairman Tillis, Ranking Member Gillibrand, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to represent the men and women of the United States Navy. The stalwart support for them and their families continues to have a profound impact on the health of our force today. Global demands on the Navy continue to grow. We must continue to recruit, develop, and retain the highly skilled workforce needed to meet the growing demand signal for naval forces. Our force structure is expected to grow as we build the Navy the nation needs, which will require increasing end strength. As we grow, our need for highly talented people increases. At the same time, propensity to serve is declining, and each of the services, as well as the civilian sector, are vying for the same limited talent pool. We are clearly in a war for talent. Current forecasts, based on leading economic indicators, suggest difficult times ahead. Labor market factors may pull sailors with critical skills into the growing civilian job market. We took note of these indicators and initiated preemptive action to retain these sailors, using all available policy levers to posture us to meet this anticipated growth. Despite this, we just made our FY17 end strength targets. This year's trajectory is good, but we will require steady and reliable funding going forward to stay on track. The new 2-year budget is great news for us and is an excellent step in that direction, and we are very appreciative of your work on that. While recruiters experienced challenges last year, an increased FY18 recruiting mission will be even more difficult, as certain fields are in short supply. And our projected growth profile requires a balanced approach of accessions increases as well as retention improvement. While aggregate retention remains high, the nuclear fields, special warfare, advanced electronics, aviation, and cyber demand close attention. Targeted bonuses continue to be the most cost-effective monetary tool in addressing retention challenges, but we're aggressively applying a combination of monetary and non-monetary incentives with good effect. Toward that end, we continue to implement and expand our Sailor 2025 program, a dynamic set of over 45 initiatives that work to provide today's sailors and their families the choices, flexibility, and transparency they expect and deserve. And combined with our manpower, personnel, training, and education enterprise transformation efforts, we will provide these programs to our sailors with a renewed focus on customer service through streamlined, efficient business processes and systems. And we will also better meet the needs of our fleet commanders through agility, responsiveness, and use of predictive analytics to be the pillar of stability in an uncertain world. We're moving out now with purpose and a committed sense of urgency on these initiatives. And we also remain actively engaged in the department's review of officer management policies, and we are very grateful for the subcommittee's interest and committed partnership in modernizing DOTMA to meet the future needs of each of the services. I look forward to your questions, and thank you.
Thank you. General Siemens.
Chairman Tillis, Ranking Member Gillibrand, distinguished members of the committee, thanks for the opportunity to appear before you on behalf of the men and women of the United States Army. I've submitted a statement for the record and would like to highlight a few of the points now. Manning our Army is one of the key components of readiness and is vital to our Army's ability to fight and win our nation's wars. Thank you for the fiscal year 2018 National Defense Authorization Act, which authorized the total Army end strength to increase by 8,500. We also appreciate the 2-year budget agreement. These will help us improve readiness and ensure the Army is fully manned in its formations in the coming years. To build the future Army, we must recruit diverse men and women of high quality and high character in a competitive market where only one in four of the 17 to 24-year-olds in the Army or in the nation is eligible to join the Army, and only 1 in 8 has a propensity to enlist in the military. Our recruiters across the nation are doing a great job and working hard to achieve the mission. The Army must also continue to retain the most talented soldiers and non-commissioned officers with the experience and skills necessary to meet our future needs. We project historic retention rates again this year for our NCOs. The Army leadership has embraced talent management as a cornerstone of how we retain our best NCOs and best officers. The Integrated Pay and Personnel System Army, or IPSA, will be the keystone in the archway of talent management. IPSA will bring a responsive system that connects all three components and builds a marketplace for talent. We are a standards-based team in the Army, and the Army remains committed to giving all soldiers who can meet the standards of a military occupational specialty the opportunity to serve in that specialty. Last year, the Army integrated the gender-neutral physical standards for initial entry training and job-specific training, and the initial results are very positive. We have successfully assessed and transferred more than 600 women into the previously closed occupations of infantry, armor, and field artillery. The opportunities are so popular, we're expanding the programs next year. The part of the total force, the Army civilians are vital to and comprise about 22% of the total personnel. We need a civilian workforce that has critical and unique skills to support the soldiers and families. As we build our force, we focus on areas that provide the foundation for our future. We remain focused on personal resiliency and suicide prevention with world-class programs for our soldiers, civilians, and family members. Sexual harassment, sexual assault, and retaliation are not compatible with Army values, and they diminish our readiness. Therefore, combating all forms of sexual misconduct remain a top priority in the Army. Although we're optimistic about the progress we've made in reducing sexual violence in the ranks, we understand there's much more work to be done as we drive towards zero. You've authorized us to grow, and we thank you for that. We must ensure that the force is ready. The Army has improved personal readiness by increasing the number of deployable soldiers. We also have an ongoing review to see how we can increase the number of deployable soldiers even more in order to enhance readiness. Because we care for soldiers as they prepare for life after the service, the Army Soldier for Life program, with support from commanders and command sergeant majors, has resulted in increased educational and employment opportunities for Army veterans and family members at a significant reduction in unemployment cost. Additionally, I appreciate that you beginning the discussion on a review of DOTMA to determine what's essential and should be retained and what needs to be updated. Our Army is strong because of the courage and commitment of our soldiers, civilians, veterans, and family members who serve our nation. And I thank you for your continued support of the all-volunteer Army.
Thank you all. Secretary Wilkie, you and I have had this discussion on a number of occasions, and thank you for your time this week in your office. I'm curious about the medically non-deployable population, and I'd like for you to talk a little bit about the number who are in that category today, some of that which is expected, and some of that needs to change, and any steps you've already taken or steps in the future you intend to take.
Yes, sir. Today, I will be releasing the new Department of Defense policy on military retention. The situation we face today is really unlike anything that we have faced, certainly in the post-World War II era. On any given day, about 13 to 14% of the force is medically unable to deploy. That comes out to be around 286,000 soldiers. In July of this year, Secretary Mattis tasked Personnel and Readiness with developing policies to ensure that everyone who comes into the service and everyone who stays in the service is worldwide deployable. The way I described it in our conversation is if Mr. Bezos and Amazon walked into Christmas week and 14% of his workforce could not perform their duties, then he would no longer be the largest company in the world. There are several issues that, there are several aspects of non-deployability that are on us. And I was hoping Senator Ernst would stay because we could talk about our experiences as junior officers. If in our small units, our commanders discovered that half of our troops were not medically ready because they had not visited the dentist, that would have been on us. We would have been accountable as junior leaders to make sure that they visited the dentist to become dentally ready to deploy. That's an issue for us. The other thing that we have seen is that in the down years in terms of recruiting for the military, we offered too many medical waivers to get into the service. The medical conditions that those service members had when they received those waivers followed them into the service as they progressed through their careers. So we have to address that. This new policy is a 12-month deploy or be removed policy. However, there are exceptions to it. Does not apply to pregnancy, does not apply to postpartum conditions. Medical boards will review the medical status of those who have been wounded. And I will use a personal example from 1970. My father was severely wounded in the invasion of Cambodia. Spent a year in an Army hospital. A determination was made by a medical board then that his service was still required, and he was allowed to recover and return to Fort Bragg in the 82nd Airborne Division. Those are the things that we will take into consideration. But we need to look at the force holistically. We have to ensure, given the climate that this country faces, that everyone who signs up can be deployed to any corner of the world at any given time, and that is the reason for the change in policy.
Thank you. In the next panel, we're going to hear from military families and groups representing them. The one thing that I hear consistently is that the frequent relocations creates a great disruption to the family, to employment, and a number of other things. So maybe starting with General Siemens, we'll just move down the line to the services personnel chiefs. What specifically is your service doing to address the concerns for the permanent change of status flexibility?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Esper, Secretary of the Army, as he's gone around and had town halls with soldiers, hear the same comment that you've made and ask how they can stay at a place longer. And so he's asked us to go back and take a look at not only if we can reduce the PCS in terms of the monetary cost of the PCS, but also provide stability to the soldiers at those installations. And we're right now trying to peel back the onion to find out where you can keep somebody in place longer to allow stability for them and perhaps continued employment for their spouse, because if the spouse is employed, they'll want to stay where they are as well.
Thank you, Admiral Burke.
Yes, sir. One of those non-monetary retention incentives I mentioned was our detailing marketplace, which is sort of a LinkedIn for the Navy, allows sailors to connect directly with prospective jobs, communicate their desires, negotiate. But the marketplace aspect of this is to view sort of not just their orders, but total next assignment in terms of a total compensation package. And geographic stability can be part of the conversation when it's possible. Career progression, ship type, where those ship types are home ported, where they are in their career may make that impossible. But through use of those techniques over the last 2 years, we've been able to increase the numbers of assignments systematically, so up to around 25% of our next career moves have been same home port for our sailors. So we're increasing it. We may be approaching a limit here just based on where our ships are home ported, but we're trying to expand that as much as feasible. And sort of the market dynamics of this detailing process are defining that for us. It's been interesting to watch.
Thank you.
We'll
General
keep it
Grosso.
Mr. Chairman, we're doing several things. We also have leveraging technology with a optimization model that will let people put their desires in and let them see the requirements, put their desires in. And we think leveraging technology will make it easier to people that want to move, and people that want to be stable. So we think that we tested it, we're slowly incrementing that across the officer force. We also, for certain career fields, have implemented a second assignment in place. That's one of our pilot retention models. But what you find is that the overseas rotation pulls people overseas. And so some of the force structure makes it difficult to keep people in place. But we are certainly trying that, and certainly some number is completely possible to do. And the final thing I would add is that I think some of the DOTMA flexibilities that we've talked about, one in particular, opting out of promotions, because I've had both, from a female retention survey, there are people that would like to stay in place, but because of the career progression forced by an up or out system, they really can't. And so I think with some DOTMA flexibility, I think you could keep families in place longer in the same position. And we'd obviously have to think about how to manage that, but I think that would be one huge benefit of some DOTMA flexibility.
General Rocco.
Senator Tillis, the Marine Corps, prior to executing permanent change of station orders, we have monitors, the person in the loop that talks to each Marine before they are issued orders to wherever they may be. And so what we try to do is we take into account the spouse's situation and the family situation in whole. We support any effort to protect their ability to have jobs or protect their jobs. The other initiative we have, and we just submitted recently within the past few months, is to reduce the time that unaccompanied tours for married members will have overseas. We're reducing that from 2 years to 15 to 18 months. So that's another initiative to try to keep the family stable and have the member go unaccompanied overseas at a less than a 2-year time period. But we support any initiatives that would protect the spouse. But we do have Marines that are in the loop for every change of station orders that we provide, and we try to mitigate that by keeping them stable or moving them to an area that both fits the Marine Corps and the family desires.
Mr. Chairman, may I add to that? On February 8th, Secretary Mattis signed a directive placing me in charge of what he calls his Close Combat Lethality Task Force. And certainly the primacy of the family and the stability of the family is what PNR has had as its prime directive for many years. But the Close Combat Lethality Task Force looks to the cohesion of the Marine Corps and the Army's frontline close combat units, cohesion throughout our history, stability in terms of the years that a team spends training with each other is the key to survivability on the battlefield. So when we look at a place like Fort Bragg, or we look at a place like Camp Lejeune, the goal of the task force, working with the two services, will be to find those formulas that allow those infantry units to stay together longer, provide their NCOs and their junior officers with deep familiarity with the soldiers and Marines that they lead, and in the end, as they leave those units, to actually populate larger command structures. But family stability is a key to unit cohesion, and unit cohesion is a key to survivability on the battlefield.
Thank you. Ranking Member Gillibrand.
Secretary Wilkie, last month you put out a harassment policy that once again includes gender identity as a protected class, yet there are reports that the department plans to change its policy towards transgender service members in the coming months. How will you ensure that this policy abides by the department's own classification of gender identity as a protected class?
Well, first of all, Senator Gillibrand, my commitment to you when I had my confirmation hearing was that the dignity of all service members is paramount in anything that I do, both in my job as undersecretary, but also in my other life as an Air Force reservist. The only thing I can say about the policy that is being discussed within the Pentagon is that it's pre-decisional. The Secretary is looking over the recommendation of the panel that you mentioned and is on track to report that recommendation to the President. But I will also note that my office is carrying out the orders of 4 separate courts across the country that keeps in place Secretary Carter's transgender policy. We are assessing transgender Americans in accord with that policy, and the services are complying with their particular needs as they move through the ranks. So right now, there is absolutely no change from a policy that was laid out in 2016. But again, my one commitment to you is that dignity is a foundational issue for all of us, and I will do my best to ensure that that is maintained throughout the force.
I was listening intently when you talked about the new non-deployability policy. Do you think this is going to impact transgender service members?
Well, I will say that with 286,000 Americans who are now listed as non-deployable, I don't think that there's any particular group that would be unaffected by a close scrutiny of our standards for deployability. That is not aimed at any group of Americans who are serving. That is an across-the-board standard that will apply to everyone when it comes to being able to fulfill the Secretary's mandate that everyone be worldwide deployable. It is a staggering number. And in this world where the forces are at a premium, and as you mentioned, we are struggling to maintain the ranks, we need to get a grip on this. As I said, some of it is on us. Some of it has to do with our training and fitness programs, which I think we need to address and bring them up to 21st century standards. But those numbers those numbers do not indicate the success or failure of any one group. It is across the board.
Thank you. For each of the services, I'd like an update on three things, and I only have a minute or two, so do your best to be concise. Combat integration, can each of you provide an update on the status of implementation in your respective service member? And can you explain how your service has adapted recruiting practices or strategies to attract female candidates? And what strategies have you employed to ensure the effectiveness of combat integration? And second, if you have time, this issue of intimate partner violence and child abuse, what is the department doing to prevent such violence against our youngest military children and against our family members? And third, if you can, what specifically are each of your services doing to end retaliation against sexual assault survivors who report those crimes? And have you actually convicted anyone of retaliation in the last year? Start on any end.
Thank you, Senator. Appreciate it. In terms of the combat integration, we're very proud within the Army. We have 675 soldiers and officers who have stepped up to the plate, raised their hand and said they want to be infantry armor. We've so far had them assigned to units at Fort Bragg and Fort Hood. We believe that the number of people in that category is increasing to the point that we can expand it to Fort Carson, Fort Campbell, Fort Bliss, and Italy for next year's assignments as they move forward. We've had no issues for sexual assault or sexual harassment in those units above what the Army average is. We think the integration's gone very well. It was deliberate, scientific, methodical, slower than some people would have liked, but I think we were very happy with the leader's first policy that we put in place.
And any update on prosecuting any cases of retaliation?
Ma'am, I'll take that for the record, but I believe there was at least one case where there was a prosecution.
Will you submit that to me? And then also status of child abuse and spousal abuse. You could submit that too. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Vice Admiral.
Senator, on the women integration, with respect to the recruiting efforts, immediately after the remaining career fields were open, which for us was predominantly Special Forces, Navy Special Warfare, SEALs, we overhauled our recruiting page, our recruiting efforts, redesigned them to depict women in those roles, and then actively reached out to public events and things, X-game events and things that would attract folks interested in those types of career fields. And we've been continuing to seek them out. One of our predominant ways of entry into the SEAL program is folks that are already in Recruit Training Command or at the Naval Academy, or NROTC, so there's already an internal Navy program for attracting folks to apply into that, so we also strengthen those programs as well. To date, we've got, we have one woman that will start Special Warfare Combat Crew training enlisted in May. So she's in her delayed entry program, and there's a training program to help every SEAL prepare for the special training that they go through. This is not something that's special for women, but she's in that training program, in her delayed entry program right now. And there is a Naval Academy first-class midshipman that has expressed interest. She's passed the physical screening test and may apply. She has not applied yet, but if she does, she would be eligible to go through additional screening this spring and summer. So that's the extent of the interest there. The submarine force integration continues to go well. We have 18 crews integrated. That's six SSBN crews, 8 SSGN crews, and then 4 SSN crews. That's with officers, total of about 79, right around there, 79 women officers, and now 99 enlisted women on 2 SSBNs. We just finished the application process for the 3rd SSBN. Additional SSBN application processes will open soon. We'll finish with those about 2021. And then the first SSN, which was designed with the berthing compartments designed for women, will come online in about 2021. And from that point forward, all submarines will be integrated with women going forward. Women are doing just absolutely wonderful in the submarine force.
Mr. Chairman, since I'm over my time, why don't we defer to the next round to complete the rest of the answers for the services so that Liz can go?
That means Generals Grasso and Rocco get ready to answer that question after Senator
And the other
Warren.
two that Vice Admiral Burke didn't answer yet, so we'll come back to it. Thank you.
Senator Warren.
Very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Gillibrand. Thank you to our witnesses for your service, and thank you for being here today. Admiral Burke, you and I had a very interesting conversation in my office last week, and I'd like to revisit it with your fellow personnel chiefs. We talked about new ways of thinking about an individual's life cycle in service, including potentially making it easier for someone who has to leave military service for either personal or professional reasons to be able to return to uniform later in life. And Admiral Burke, I know you're interested in piloting that concept. Rather than up or out, you were talking about up and return. So I'd like to ask the other services, do you also think there's value in opening up opportunities to individuals who've left the military but might be interested in returning? And can you just say a brief word about what you see as the pros and cons of that? General Rocca, could I start with you?
Yes, Senator Warren, thank you. And that's an important question. So in the Marine Corps, we have, and albeit our numbers are small, but we have the Career Intermission Program, and we currently have about 12 Marines that are involved in that. And that involves the Marine basically stopping their time, going out into the civilian world, and then coming back and then picking up where they left off. We also have the Enhanced Advanced Degree Program, where they can both go and stay in uniform, or they can spend up to 15 months being paid full, and then go get an advanced degree of their choosing, and then come back with no payback. When I say no payback, there's a payback in commitment, but there's not a payback in a specific job. We have over 300 Marines that go to the advanced degree program up in Monterey, but they go back to specific jobs inside the Marine Corps. So we give them the opportunity to do something possibly in the Marine Corps that they like, or go get an advanced degree in a field of their choosing from 12 to 15 months to go do what they need to do, and then come back into the Marine Corps with no harm to their career.
Okay, and I take it you like this program, that this program is working well for the Marines.
It is working very well for us.
Okay, it may not be quite as far as Admiral Burke was talking about in terms of out and being able to reel back in, but at least it's a step in that direction. General Grosso, could you say a word about that?
Yes, Senator Warren, I completely support that idea, and we do it to a small extent today. We actively recruit we call them prior services sessions on the enlisted side and on the officer side. We find that we don't actually attract them back for several reasons, but we do think it's very powerful. If you've got an experienced person, again, we think some increase in constructive credit would help. Because right now, if you come back in, you have to start where you left, but you've got all this additional experience, so some additional constructive credit may help us attract more.
It's a very interesting point. It's also an interesting point about the kinds of people you may attract back, that people, for example, who are in high tech, who are in computing, they learn a lot while they're out, would like to come back, and you'd very much like to have them back, but you may need some flexibility around how you get to attract them again. If you could, General Siemens?
Senator, appreciate the question. The Army supports this kind of program. We're actually excited about the opportunities. General Grosso talked about on the enlisted force. For the Army, we brought in 68,500 soldiers last year. About 5,000 of them were prior service. In other words, they had served before and wanted to come back. On the officer side, we brought about 1,000 officers on a call to active duty as the active force grew last year, where we reached out and invited them to come back. Most of them were in the reserve or guard, so they had to get clearance from their units to come back on. I recall I went back to an alumni event one time, and I met a classmate who had gotten out, and my wife asked him, you know, do you miss the Army? And he looked at her and said, every day of my life. And so for a guy like that, it would be wonderful to be able to have a transparent, quick process to bring them back into uniform. You asked for the pros and cons. I think an obvious pro is that you get an experienced individual who comes back in. The con would have to be, they'd have to continue to meet the standards that they met before. So, but I think it's a great program. I think the Army would endorse that and like to be part of it as well.
Good. Well, Admiral Burke, you started this. Anything you want to add to it? At least you started getting me involved in this, and the idea of piloting it,
Yes, ma'am.
which is what you said you wanted to do. Would you like to add a brief word on that? And then I'll go to Secretary Wilkie.
Yes, ma'am. Well, thank you for the question. I think it has a lot of potential in terms of the idea of we can do this to some degree today, but it's very cumbersome, it's very difficult on the officer side. We've piloted this to much greater success on the enlisted side. For example, today we've got around 8,000 gaps at sea. We can fairly quickly bring folks back in that were on the reserve side, bring them back into the active component who are enlisted if they've got the right constructive credit and their skills haven't atrophied and things of that nature. But we're filling, you know, hundreds of gaps at sea from reservists that we brought back into the active component. On the officer side, it takes months to bring them back in due to some really, you know, kind of outdated scrolling processes that are in the law. But we eventually would have this idea of reserve component, active component permeability, the ability to move back and forth for the reasons that you articulated at the beginning. We're thinking in terms of, you know, a longer career, making our people pyramid narrower at the base, so we bring in fewer people, giving them opportunities to move around, but as importantly, with this commitment to family readiness, which is important to sailor readiness and fleet readiness, we have to let people step off the treadmill occasionally, or they're not going to hang out for a 40-year career. So we've got to have an option to out. So that option could be into the reserves for a brief period of time, as long as they could quickly come back in when that life-work balance need is met, or the other alternative would be an up and stay, a horizontal career track where they can keep flying, maybe at a different tempo, go into a research job, whatever it may be. So these are the types, we need alternatives to out, and right now there are none.
Yeah, I'm over my time, but if the chair will indulge me for just a minute, I'd like to ask Secretary Wilkie, what would it take to do something like that? Does the Pentagon have the authority right now? Or do you need Congress to step in and provide more flexibility to make this happen?
Yes, Senator, it would be a combination of the two. I think for the Pentagon, it would be a cultural issue. And I'll give you an example, and I'll play off what Admiral Burke just said. If we believe in the concept of the total force, then it should be much easier for a service member to move amongst Guard, active, and reserve components. That also means, in my view, if someone in your Yankee division sees an opportunity in the active component that he or she feels they're qualified for, they should have every right and every opportunity to apply for those positions in the active component. Again, this is not your daddy's National Guard anymore, your granddaddy's Guard anymore. So that, the answer to your question is it would need help from the Congress in some respects, because we're talking about Title 32 and Title 10 on the Guard side, but we have to rethink the way we use our our reserve component, and that means we have to acknowledge that the family rules that were in existence when these rules were created don't apply anymore.
So I very much appreciate that. And I understand that recruitment and retention is as much art as it is science. But we know that the population that has the ability and the propensity to serve, and particularly in leadership positions, is a narrow group. And figuring out how best to tap into that group and make them an ongoing part of our military seems crucial to building and strengthening the kind of fighting force we need. So I appreciate your thoughts on this. I really like the idea that we look at some non-traditional approaches and recognize how other changes impact where we are today, and hope that we'll be able to build on that going forward, and that you get some real support for the flexibility you need. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I apologize for going over.
Thank you. Great questions. Senator McCaskill.
Thank you so much. Mr. Wilkie, I think it's great. I've had a chance to review, but not in detail, all of the new sexual harassment policy that's been issued by DOD. My first question is, why weren't civilian personnel and contractors not covered?
My time limit, I made a commitment to the committee that I would move within 60 days to comply with the law that you passed 6 years ago. The most ready-made avenue to that was to instruct the services, which I have complete authority to do through the Secretary of Defense. There are about 30 different statutes that govern the civilian component that have to do with union negotiations in one respect. We are working on that. That is the next step, is to make sure that these standards apply to the entire workforce, and that's 900,000 civilians. But it's absolutely vital. It's in Co-8 now.
Okay. I just want to make sure that you know that I know the ranking member and I are not going to go away until we're sure everybody's covered.
Right.
Also, what is the standard to substantiate an allegation under this policy? I know the Army uses preponderance. Is this policy envision using a preponderance of the evidence?
I would have to get you a legal answer on that. I will tell you what has changed, and this also has to do with the legal issue that you present. For the first time, we are telling these services that substantiated allegations of harassment,
Go on their record.
bullying, go on the record.
Yeah, I'm aware of all that, but that doesn't help me if I don't know what substantiation means.
Right.
So I've got to know if substantiation is a preponderance, is it clear and convincing? I mean, these are really important considerations, and I'm sure someone has, knowing how thorough you guys are when you do one of these new things, I'm sure this has been in the works for a long time. Yeah. This discussion's been had, and this committee needs to know what standard is going to be used for substantiation.
Yeah. Well, I can say that with the reporting requirement on the efficiency report, that could be in the Navy, a captain's mast where someone has been convicted of something, and it runs that legal gamut. So if a body or an officer has concluded that another member has committed an infraction or a crime, that officer puts that on that individual's efficiency report. In my experience as a junior officer, nothing gets anyone's attention quicker than knowing that the career is on the line and that people are watching. And I think as we have had this national conversation and as it impacted the military, we've lost that fundamental military lever of enforcement.
Well, that's all great, but we still have a problem in that we don't know what the standard is. Because what's going to happen here is you're going to have a he said, she said about whether or not it was harassment. And then somebody's going to have to determine whether it's substantiated, which is going to mean corroboration. It's going to mean other evidence that might be surrounding the incident. It's going to mean interviewing a number of personnel. And at the end of it, whoever's in charge of deciding whether it's substantiated or not has to know what the standard of proof is. So this needs to be clearly delineated. And if you haven't done it yet, if we're going to have a different standard in every branch, then it's a problem. So we got to get busy, and you've got to be able to answer that question clearly with just one phrase.
You just answered the question for me. Our instructions are to standardize all of those matters across the services. So there's, and I would have to get, I'm a recovering lawyer. I would have to get someone who knows the particulars in the depth to give you
That would
the
be great.
answer that you deserve.
Yeah, and that's an answer that I think we all need to have, because frankly, it's important for everyone to have really clear guidance what the standard is. Because if you start out and no one's sure, then you're going to have disparate outcomes and you're going to have a lot of unhappiness, especially if it's going on someone's record. I'm really glad it's going on their record. That's the right thing. That's why it's really important. Every single one of these has to be laid out.
Yes.
And finally, and briefly, if you'd indulge me, if you're not really familiar, are you as familiar with the UCMJ as perhaps maybe some other witnesses might be?
I have been subject to the UCMJ for many years
Okay,
in my other life.
so I just want to clear up, there seems to be some confusion about the way the system works now in terms of crimes being committed. I want to clear up briefly that there has been some things said, and I wasn't there when these were said, but evidently that gave the impression that prosecutors were not involved in investigating the cases, and that prosecutors were not involved in advising the cases, and that prosecutors weren't the primary source of information for a convening authority in terms of recommendations of going forward. And it's my understanding that the trial counsel, which is what a military prosecutor is called, they review, they evaluate, and they advise on the case at every single stage, from the initial phase all the way to the court-martial. Is that correct?
Absolutely.
So any characterization that prosecutors are not involved in investigating and advising these cases is just incorrect.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you very much.
Senator.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Senator Grosso and Senator Rocco, do you remember the question you've got to answer? We'll start with Senator Grosso.
Yeah, Senator Gillibrand, ma'am.
Clarify for Claire's question. What my understanding is, not until a decision's to go forward to trial. So we talked to the chief prosecutor at the Air Force, and he said he was never consulted by counsel or by a commander until the decision was referred to trial.
Yeah.
In 20 years.
That, I don't know, I don't know the context in which she was speaking. I can tell you that when any command, if it's a commander who is a commander of a company or a squadron or a battalion, is faced with a legal matter involving one of his troops, or airmen or Marines or sailors.
Or one of her troops.
Or her troops. That trial counsel from the JAG is his, not only his legal advisor, but he is also carrying out the details of that investigation. That is my, that has been my experience.
So I've been told the only person that consults with the commander is his general counsel, his counsel. He does not actually speak to the prosecutor until after a decision's been made.
No, that's not my experience.
Okay, can I have a letter from each one of your services outlining exactly when prosecutors are consulted? Because I talked to the chief prosecutor for the Air Force who did the job for 20 years, and he said he literally was never consulted until the decision was made that court-martial, that it would move forward to court-martial, but never in the deciding phase. And in fact, his challenge to me was that once the decision was gone to court-martial, that he would have to go back to the commander every time he wanted to call a witness and get permission, and that delay in and of itself was problematic.
I will get you a comprehensive answer from the general counsel.
Right, about when, at what stage in the process is the prosecutor engaged, briefed on the case, and I don't think it's before a convening authority is
It not
is
only
called.
is before a convening authority, it's before there's even a preliminary hearing. It doesn't even go to the convening authority until after there's a preliminary hearing at which the trial counsel is engaged in.
So not, so the, you will give us the briefing, because I was told that not until a decision was made that a case would go forward was a trial counsel engaged.
You've heard the request for the record
Yeah.
from each of the service lines.
Just
and
to
from
tell
the
us, how does
department.
it work, and for each of the services?
And let's figure out a time we can both be there and have the head lawyer for each service come and sit down with Senator Gillibrand and I so we can clear up what I think are a lot of misperceptions that are being spread around. Thank you very much.
And Senator, now you know why Gary Lealing knows I'm a recovering lawyer.
Yes, yes. Okay, back to the questions we asked.
And then we'll transition to the next
The Vice Admiral
panel.
didn't answer about if he's prosecuted any retaliations and whether he's doing anything on domestic violence.
Start here.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yes, ma'am. On the domestic violence front, we continue to expand our prevention programs. deployed resilience counselors on board our large decks, and we've expanded those out to pierside for our smaller combatants. Those folks are helping with interpersonal skills training, along with a domestic violence prevention mobile app that we issued that helps enhance training and provide local resources to include emergency contact information. We're continuing to evaluate private sector programs that provide research-supported frameworks to help us reduce interpersonal violence. On the child abuse issues, we've expanded and continue to improve our training on our new parent support program service providers. This program has been relatively successful. We take at-risk families and teach them basic skills, increase the father's engagement, promote parenting resiliency. And in the past year, no reported cases of child abuse or neglect for those high-risk families that participated in the program. And then the high-risk for violence coordinated community response team program, again, for high-risk, known possible issues, it has been panning out as well. That gives us a coordinated community response, local law enforcement, base, police, whatever the situation might be, that are on call, known response force ready to come and protect and assist, actual or alleged past victims, potential victims of domestic or child abuse. We also piloted in a number of different locations, One Love Foundation facilitators to help with these interpersonal skills. They're helping us with get to the left of a number of destructive behaviors, but intimate partner and child abuse being among them. And part of that was an assessment tool for how successful was that. We're just getting to the point where we're going to be able to employ some of the assessment tools to find out how effective the One Love training was for our forces. But we're continuing to employ some big data approaches. We brought behavioral science folks on board, and we're looking at as many approaches as possible. Finally, CNO established a 4-star governance board to look at signature behaviors. Our focus is on, the behavior at the high end of the spectrum. How do we want sailors to behave we'll continue to focus on prevention, but we want the focus on the winning team behavior at the high end of the spectrum as well. We have to do both, not just focus on the pass-fail line. So domestic violence and suicide and some of these other things are very much at the top of the list of the focus of that 4-star group right now. So we're bringing as many resources to bear to take some non-traditional looks at trying new approaches here rather than just continue to train and hope we get new results.
Thank you. Senator
Senator Gillibrand, reference your question about combat integration. We do have such a small number of positions, about 1,700, that we had to finally integrate. These positions are all of our special operations career fields. And interestingly, we have a challenge recruiting both men and women. And we have actually put a contract for a group of people. Typically, they hire former special operators, and they help us recruit both men and women. And so they're going into high schools to find very athletic, intelligent people. But it's a challenge for both men and women. We also recruit within the force. So we have had 12 women enter the program, and unfortunately, we have none that have passed the physical exam. And in fact, we had just one eliminated yesterday for a knee injury. And so I think we're certainly trying hard, but unfortunately, we haven't gotten a woman to go through. And I think some of the thing you discussed earlier about the health of the population, women are even less available than men in that young population. So I think that's something that we have to look at. Reference your questions about child abuse. Unfortunately for the Air Force, since FY13, we've had a rate per 1,000 that's been fairly stable, so about 4 rate per 1,000. And so we've really been targeting the leadership both in training, both on the officer, on the commander side and on that senior enlisted, to recognize signs and to encourage people to seek help. And not to have a barrier to help. And just like Admiral Burke discussed, we've had tremendous success with our new parent support program. And our data shows us that 99% have not reoffended. We are rolling out a new program as well that's going to target couples that have already experienced some form of violence, and trying to help them understand the dynamic of that, to also bring down this child abuse. And then finally, I will say that the work that we're doing on our sexual assault prevention, just on prevention in general and healthy life skills work that's ongoing, I think will also tangentially have an impact on this challenge for us as well. And I will get you your answer on, I don't know the answer on retaliation, but I'll get that.
For each of the service, just tell me, how's it going? Like, have we prosecuted any yet? If we have a rate so high, we need to start prosecuting it as the crime that it is.
Ranking Member Gillibrand, for the Marine Corps, your first question about females, all the occupational fields are currently open to female Marines. We have over 300 female Marines that are in previously closed units. For female recruiting, Marine Corps Recruiting Command has focused their efforts to recruit females at colleges through sports programs and high schools through the sports programs. So they've emphasized that and focused their efforts in trying to open up some avenues that were previously closed. For retaliation, it's not tolerated. We investigate them fully. I don't have the numbers on what are the results of it, but I know a number of them, senior officers, are under currently open investigations on retaliation. For family member violence, we have the Family Assistance Program. This is at all bases and stations. They have a 24-hour helpline, and they provide support to the victims. We also provide counseling and legal support to those affected by it. And finally, on the family assistance, when we talk about domestic violence, we incorporate that training in pre-deployment training, post-deployment training, and all commanders course and schools, professional military schools, to make sure that the commanders and the senior leaders are aware of what's out there, what the numbers are, and what's available to help their Marines and the families. Thank you.
Well, thank you all for being here, and appreciate the member participation. We're going to transfer to the next panel. Thank you for your service and continue engagement with the committee.
I think she replaced it. It's working.
It just wasn't on. And her, we could have the witnesses just come forward. Thank you. Thank you, Mitch. Appreciate it. Thanks for breakfast.
Oh, you're welcome. Do it again. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you so much. Really, you're doing a great job. Very great. Shelley, thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it. We can come back to order. I'd like to welcome the witnesses. On the second panel, we have Kathy Roth-Duquet, CEO of Blue Star Families, Ms. Kelly Haruska, Government Relations Director for the National Military Family Association, and Mr. Michael Haney, PhD, Vice Chancellor for Strategic Initiatives and Innovation at Syracuse University. Thank you all for being here, and we'll allow up to 5 minutes for an opening statement, and we will start with Ms. Roth-Duquet.
Thank you very much, Senator. And thank you for including us in this hearing. We enjoyed the prior testimony, and we see great movement over the years, and we credit a lot of that to your leadership and the leadership of your staff. Blue Star Families builds communities that supports military families and connects them to their civilian neighbors. We believe that all military families should be able to serve and simultaneously build thriving and healthy families. One way we do this is by performing research and using the resulting data to inform others and to develop our own programs and solutions. Our annual Military Family Lifestyle Survey provides a yearly snapshot of the state of military families. It's released by the Senate and House caucuses on military families. We believe military families are central to the security of our nation, and they aren't a nice to have. They're a component of the force. In the 21st century, the majority of people who serve are married and do have children and will serve over time. Our survey results show that service members and their families have substantial difficulties balancing work and family, and that's especially acute for female service members and female spouses operating in a military culture designed to meet the needs of male service members and their families. Rather than ad hoc measures meant to provide support during periods of acute warfare, military families must be understood as a structural component of the force. Thinking about families in this way makes the country smarter about what it takes to ensure our country's national security and improves the ability of DoD to meet military family support needs. So when we asked this past year, what could DoD do to make it easier for you to ensure your family is happy and healthy during your or your loved one's military service? The top things people talked about was operational tempo, which included their ability to take their own leave. That was an interesting finding and a top finding. Spouse employment and child care. We also saw a central topic this year being the lack of integration in their local civilian communities, and we see that as being a real avenue for improvement. So some of our key stats is that nearly half of military families said that the amount of time away from family was their #1 concern. Deployments were cited as a top stressor associated with time in the military. 56% felt the DoD support services were inadequate to support their children dealing with the unique challenges of military lifestyle. And over time, over a 3-year trend, we've seen service members, veteran spouse, and post-9/11 veteran subgroups indicating increased rate of suicidal ideation. So we see some policy actions or solutions that would respond to these. Very much applaud the ideas about reducing family separation, increasing predictability in absences, and increasing dwell time. Can't overstate how much sequestration and continuing resolutions hurt military families because it reduces predictability. Even with the very brief shutdown we had recently, we heard from Special Forces families, from National Guard families about not having support for families who were wounded in action, people having to go into their own credit cards to get over to Landstuhl to see their service members, not having support at a memorial service for a fallen special operations person. Hundreds of National Guard not getting their training, not getting their pay. People are living on a very tight leash, and this is real harm. Improved leave benefit and ability to take leave. We need to investigate this further, but in a write-in response, a #1 problem that people stated was not being able to take the leave that they've earned. This is causing a lot of problems for families. That's no impact on the budget. What's going on there, and can we do something about it? We do believe we need to fully fund and staff the DoD Office of Suicide Prevention because of the increased trends in suicidal ideation we see. Spouse employment, financial consideration is a key factor in whether or not people stay in the military. 62% of our families in this survey said they felt some or a great deal of stress because of their current financial situations. Again, sequestration harms that. In our survey, we had an uptick of unemployment. 28% of military spouses told us that they had been actively seeking work in the last 4 weeks. We saw that went up because many who had stopped seeking work in previous years, maybe they've heard more about it, and so they've started looking again. That's a good sign, but we need to help them work. A majority of military spouses earned 0 income in 2016. Majority of those who did work made less than $20,000 a year. Not coincidentally, about half of military families have less than $5,000 in available savings. That causes a lot of pain when people transition out. About half of both active duty and spouses say that their top obstacle to financial security is spouse unemployment and underemployment. So we very much support Senator Kane's Military Spouse Employment Act and applaud Senator Perdue and the other senators for joining it. We are interested in asking federal hiring managers, in addition, to report on why they don't hire military spouses. 79% of military spouses in our survey who applied for GS positions did not get them, despite the fact that since 2014, there is special authority that allows hiring managers to appoint qualified spouses. I think we should ask them why they're not hiring them. We are interested in the idea of legislation that might reimburse states for spouses, military spouses' licensing fees, so that states can waive licensing fees for military spouses. Childcare continues to be a critical problem. Issues related to children, time away from children, or worries about the impact of military life was the top stressor for female service members and their top reason for exiting military service in the next 2 years. We dove a little deeper into the experience of of females in uniform this past year's survey. You may be shocked to hear that the experience of women in uniform is not the same as the experience of men in uniform. And childcare is one of the key reasons. 2/3 of men said they had childcare to meet their needs in uniform. 1/3 of women said the same thing. We asked people in dual military couples. Interestingly, the husband in a dual military couple did have childcare to meet his need. The female in a dual military couple did not. A top reason for not working identified by the military spouse respondents were the service members' job demands, which includes the moves and the unpredictability of deployment and training, and then childcare. Both of those were the majority reasons. So we think that these suggestions to increase dwell time, allow military service members to turn down a move for family stability, and allow service members to take leaves of absence for family reasons, particularly for females in the military, will be critical. The needs of the military and national security have to come first. We certainly don't want to trump those, but I'm heartened to hear the services feel that this is possible. Female service members aren't nice to have, they need to have. To get the qualified people we need to run our military, we have to have that 17% and growing females, and we have to make military service compatible with them having the kind of American life that other Americans enjoy, which includes having children. We have to expand options for affordable childcare and improve flexible work hiring initiatives so that we can allow military spouses to work under the conditions that their national security mission requires them to work. Military spouses aren't not working because they don't have the skill sets. It's because they need flexible work conditions. Those do exist. We just need better visibility and better cooperation with the military services to allow that opportunity for the outside resources that can help us find these kinds of jobs more possible. We support the progress of the Availability of Child Care for Every Service Member and Spouse Act, the Access Act. Finally, I do want to mention local civilian community integration, even though it's not a DoD function per se, but 70% of married service members live off installation. 72% of our service members who responded to our survey were less than 2 years in their current community. So they're moving very frequently, and perhaps because of this, the majority of people who we asked said that they do not feel that they belong to the communities in which they live. They don't feel they belong. They would like to feel that way. We asked them, how many conversations have you had with civilians in the last month, just in bands? 3 to 6, more than 10? 30% said 0. 0 conversations. So this isolation makes it hard to get jobs. It hurts mental health. It has a direct effect on child abuse and neglect. If you don't have someone you can turn to help you with your families, that's an outcome. So isolation from family and friends is a top 5 stressor each year that we've done our survey. We think there are things that can be done. We are frustrated by the how difficult it is to create public-private partnerships with the Department of Defense to share the resources that are available in the communities, the sea of goodwill that there is for military people. We are interested in exploring the idea of an Office of Strategic Partnership in the DoD, similar to what exists in the VA and has been very effective, to perhaps push some of the initiatives that really are political and not operational. We need to connect the civilians and the military, and having more openness at the community level would help that. As part of the work I did with the Bipartisan Policy Council on defense personnel reform, we suggested asking all young Americans to take the ASVAP, the Armed Forces Vocational Aptitude Test, male and female at 18, a simplified online version. We think having one time where all Americans consider what work they might do in the military in itself might break down barriers and might allow us to bring people into the military who don't currently serve, and creative ideas like that are something that we're very interested in. So thank you for letting me speak. I apologize for going over my time.
Ms. Haruska.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Gillibrand, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity for the National Military Family Association to speak with you today about the readiness of military families. Our statement submitted for the record highlights many issues important to military families, and I'll touch on a few of them. We thank you for pay raises for the past 2 years at the Employment Cost Index, and we appreciate the President's fiscal year 19 budget submission, which includes a 2.6% pay raise at ECI. This is welcome news for military families whose purchasing power has been pinched by recent decreases to BAH, increased health care costs, and retirement changes. We thank you for your quick work in the fiscal year 18 NDAA to ensure military children with life-threatening conditions have access to hospice services without having to forego curative care and quality of life therapies. Your actions not only fixed an urgent problem for impacted families, but it sends a signal to all military families that egregious TRICARE coverage issues will be addressed. We thank you for your dedication to creating meaningful reforms of the military health system to enhance medical readiness and improve access to care and contribute to a quality patient experience for military families. However, we have concerns about how the healthcare reforms you enacted are being implemented. We urge you to maintain close oversight as DoD implements healthcare reform and hold them accountable for making improvements and accessing quality a reality. While DoD has made progress in making the Exceptional Family Member Program more consistent across the services, military families need better coordination between the relocation, education, healthcare, and family support elements of the program. We also urge you to adopt the recommendations of the Military Compensation and Retirement Modernization Commission and direct DoD to align coverage under the ECHO program, especially respite care, with state Medicaid waiver programs. Thank you for providing reimbursements for relicensing recertification for military spouses in last year's NDAA. The day after the President signed the legislation into law, our office and various Facebook pages were lit up with questions on how to apply for these reimbursements. Military spouses are very excited about this new policy and are anxious to see it implemented. Please hold DoD accountable to the promise. In 2014, the Defense Suicide Prevention Office released a report outlining an approach for tracking military family member suicides. As a response, Congress included a provision in the fiscal year 15 NDAA for DoD to track military family suicides. We are extremely frustrated. DoD has yet to release any information to meet this mandate. If we don't know the scope of the problem, targeting solutions is impossible. Part of the job of keeping our current force ready is preparing for transitions, including the transition to civilian life. The President's executive order dated January 9th expanded military one-source from 6 months to 1 year post-separation or retirement. Let's make this permanent. We also ask you to ensure that as the nature of deployments continues to change, as the services increase in strength, and military missions evolve, programs to support military families, healthcare and childcare access, and the pillars of military compensation remain strong. Military family and service member readiness are inescapably linked. Military families shudder when they hear their service member may not have the training or equipment they need to do the job. Service members can't focus on their job if their family is pinched financially because a spouse can't find a job, their sick child can't get a doctor's appointment, or there's no quality child care available. Programs and services must be responsive, consistently funded, and constantly evaluated as the needs of our military families evolve with the demands of the mission. Thank you for supporting military families.
Thank you. Mr. Haney.
Chairman Tillis, Ranking Member Gillibrand, thank you very much for the opportunity to address you today on the topic of military family readiness. I would actually like to use my time to speak briefly on the central role that military families play in our national defense. This year marks the 45th birthday of America's experiment with an all-volunteer military, and as the volunteer force has evolved as an American institution, all too often the narrative associated with the role that our military families play in our national security has been misplaced, marginalized, and misunderstood. As members of this committee understand, America's all-volunteer force assumes a deep pool of eligible volunteers. However, as we heard from the previous panel, today, DoD's own estimates suggest that approximately 70% of the nation's roughly 34 million 17 to 20-year-olds are ineligible for military service due to issues ranging from obesity, fitness, and insufficient formal education. At the same time, over the past 20 years, consistently, we have witnessed a decline in the willingness or propensity of the nation's youth to consider military service. According to the University of Michigan's annual Monitoring the Future survey of high school students, today less than 12% of American youth are even willing to consider military service after high school. So while the nation's defense rests on the assumption of a robust pool of eligible volunteers, the reality is today that assumption has never been more tenuous. All that said, since the advent of the all-volunteer force, the nation's most reliable pipeline of eligible and willing volunteers comes from our military families, the daughters, sons, brothers, and sisters of those who are now or who have served in the nation's uniform. In other words, one consequence of the all-volunteer force has been to create military service as a family business. This means our ability to recruit the best and the brightest to military service in the future depends to a significant degree on our capacity to support those families serving today. So how are we doing? This is an exceedingly difficult question to answer because as an academic, I want research and data. And in that regard, I'd like to highlight to the committee that there is a profound deficit of research focused on the social, economic, and wellness concerns of our nation's military families. However, what we do know from research conducted by my teammates at Syracuse University's Institute for Veterans and Military Families and by others to include at this table suggests that we must do more and better, but I will share some of what we do know. We know that military spouses are exceedingly well educated as compared to their civilian counterparts, but as we've heard already this morning or this afternoon, many experience unemployment at a rate 3 times higher than their non-military peers. This could be because military spouses relocate 10 times more frequently than their civilian counterparts, creating gaps in employment and education and making it nearly impossible to create the security, stability, and community connections required to sustain a career. Those military spouses who are able to secure employment on average earn 38% less than their civilian counterparts. We know that employment and underemployment challenges experienced by military spouses undercut the financial health of our military families. While military families save at the same rate as their civilian counterparts, over 1/3 report difficulty covering monthly expenses. Only 50% report a rainy day fund for available emergencies, and as Kathy mentioned earlier, a recent survey found that 54% of those planning to leave the military within the next 12 months have less than $5,000 in savings available to support that transition to civilian life. One thing that I think we need to talk more about are our military children. We know that children of the post-9/11 generation have been exposed to unique stressors. 2 recent studies demonstrate that military-connected children have higher prevalence of depressive symptoms, sadness, suicidal ideation, and suicide attempts as compared to non-military connected youth. While the costs and consequences of the military service experience on military children is a story that will unfold in the years and decades to come, all indications are today the costs and consequences will be high. Importantly, we also know that military spouses and military children are resilient, resourceful, adaptable, entrepreneurial, and engaged in the world around them. We know that military spouses and military children have much to contribute to our communities during and after military service. Finally, we also know that in recent years there has been a steady decline in the willingness of currently serving military members to recommend military service to their own children. Today, only 40% of those serving indicate that they would recommend military service, with the unwilling majority citing concerns related to the well-being of the family as being one of the primary factors in their decision. All of this is to say that many inside and outside of government have long hypothesized a relationship between the concerns of military families and DoD's ability to recruit and retain the most skilled, qualified, and service-minded individuals. From where I sit today, the data is clear. Investments positioned to care for and support our military families are central to our military readiness and to our national security. Further, these investments are morally and ethically right. It's my hope that the public and the private sector join together to act to make strengthening our military families a national priority, acknowledging that building a prosperous and safe nation for future generations requires that we treat our military families as a treasured national resource. Thank you for your time, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you all. Mr. Haney, I'm guessing that's not a Tennessee Volunteers orange tie you got on. Is that?
Senator, it is not. That is the proud Syracuse orange. Big game tonight. North Carolina State up in the Carrier Dome.
I want to start with you and the question I had. I served in the legislature before I came up to the Senate, and we were constantly trying to figure out how we partner with the states and with the private sector. And Ms. Roth-Duquet, I heard your concern about the DoD partnering not going so well. What, in you all's view, should we do more, particularly when you have a relatively highly skilled workforce that's grossly underpaid? Some of that probably relates to their relocation rate and just not being able to go and get the credentialing they need in a given new jurisdiction. Are there any good examples out there of states or private sector collaborations that are working? What more can we do there?
So I think one of the things that is interesting to me, and I'm going to come back to something that Kathy mentioned earlier, is we saw the private sector stand up en masse when the veterans unemployment rate hit the 20-25%. Collaboration between the private sector actors and coalitions of firms, 200, 300 strong, focused on solving the veterans employment problem. We have not seen that same kind of effort as it relates to military spouses. I do believe that for the last 2 years of the Obama administration, I was the vice chairman of the Federal Advisory Committee on Reform at the VA. One of the things that Kathy mentioned that I think has been transformative relative to the VA's ability to partner with the private sector is creating a focused effort in office around public-private partnerships. And I agree very much with Kathy's recommendation. And I think that in this regard, DoD could benefit from that opportunity as well.
Ms. Roth-Duquet, you have anything to add to that?
Blue Star Families helps convene a group of about 55 nonprofits, foundations, and government leaders. And they did all endorse this idea of an office similar to the VA at DOD. I do agree that it takes a sustained effort. Most Americans have no idea this problem exists, and most employers have no idea. And when they hear that it does, they are interested in these talented workers who actually have health insurance, by the way. So they're pretty attractive employees. But it takes a big voice, and a bigger voice than we have. So the work that we can do with senators, with states, but also getting the DOD this kind of office can get us to replicate the success that there was in veteran hiring, I think.
Ms. Haruska, you mentioned in your opening comments about, on the one hand, you welcome some of the healthcare reforms, but you did have some possible concerns or potential concerns about the implementation. I'd like for you to maybe expand a little bit on that. And I know your organization's also advocated for extended healthcare options for healthcare option benefits for military dependents with special needs. So could you talk a little bit more about what we should be mindful of as we move through some of the changes?
Well, we outlined quite a bit of our concerns on the healthcare reform in our testimony. I'll just use one example. We appreciate DOD is trying to make the healthcare benefit for military families a little similar to their civilian counterparts. And so we are starting enrollment periods. And this year is the first year, but the rules are a little lax. So next January, you will have an opt-in period. I believe it actually will go November to December, and then you must enroll in your health care program starting January 1st. And so the department has created qualifying life events. As we look at those qualifying life events, dissatisfaction with the military treatment facility is not a reason to opt out. And we have particular concerns about this because you may have a wonderful experience with a military treatment facility, say here in the National Capital Region, but you move to another area. You say, I've had a great experience, I'm going to sign up and go to my military treatment facility, and then you have a very poor experience. And then you're trapped. And you have nowhere, you have to deal with that one healthcare facility until the next open enrollment period. And if you have a child that has a particular condition, or if you find you have concerns, you're pregnant, you have concerns about a pregnancy, that can be particularly restrictive. And that's just one one issue that we have.
Well, thank you. We'll certainly take what you expanded on in the written testimony and any additional information you'd like to submit to the record as being instructive as we go through the implementation. Ranking Member Gillibrand.
Thank you. The rate of entrepreneurship in America has grown in the past couple of years, and the gig economy is estimated to be at a third of the U.S. workforce. When considering the barriers that military families face finding work, these avenues may offer a key to increasing employment. Mr. Haney, can you speak about programs such as Boots to Business and VWise, which is Veteran Women Igniting the Spirit of Entrepreneurship, and whether the DOD can learn from them in terms of military spousal employment?
Senator, I can. One of my great passions is military-connected entrepreneurship. Matter of fact, I'm leaving here to fly to Austin, Texas, and for the next 4 days, almost 400 military spouses, military veterans interested in pursuing entrepreneurship will receive training, mentorship, and support through programs that we operate out of the Institute. Business ownership is a unique opportunity for this population, both our military veterans as well as our military spouses, to craft a vocation for themselves in a way that accommodates some of the unique challenges, stressors associated with military service. Military veterans and military spouses are over-indexed to business ownership in this country relative to non-military connected populations. If you look at veterans represent about 6% of the population, but almost 15% of all small business owners in this country. Take women veterans, female spouses, our VWISE program that you mentioned. Now thousands of women have received training through that program, and they're outgrowing businesses at a rate of venture creation rate 92%, 5-year survival rate of those businesses up in the 80% range, which is unheard of. So I think it's a unique opportunity for this population, one that the Boots to Business program and the ability of spouses to take advantage of that has to remain central to how we think about transitioning families out of the military.
Thank you. Researchers have found that military service adds additional challenges for married couples, which you've all testified to, such as increased household responsibilities for spouses or the impact of psychological effects of service on marital stability. Married volunteers who served in the post-9/11 wars were slightly more likely to become divorced during their first 2 years post-service compared to civilian populations. What can the DoD do better to support military families to address these unique strains? Go ahead, Kathy.
A lot of the ideas about creating flexibility in the life cycle, I think would go a long way. Allowing, our current military is millennials, and millennials value stability very highly. They value stability more than they do upward mobility, in fact. So the opportunity to weigh in on their careers, we believe, would create a lot of strength within the family. So I think that is an important element. Predictability also would reduce a lot of the strain that creates strains in marriage and creates strains around children and child care. So I think the same things that will create more satisfaction in the career itself will provide a lot of strength in marriage. I don't think DoD should get into the marriage therapy business. I don't think it's going to be their strength. I think the underlying structure and this partnering with the people whose strength it is, organizations like Tara Kiley's Frog Foundation. There's a lot of great organizations out there. Let's make it possible for them to do their work.
So I'm concerned about not just divorce rates, but also domestic violence rates and suicide rates that you've all talked about today. And you know, we have our every other year we have the survey of sexual violence in the military, but spouses aren't actually surveyed. And I would really like to either add the spouses to that survey, and I'd like your thoughts on that, or create a unique survey to get some of this other data too. A survey that's conducted by the military and aggregated every year, every other year, of issues like divorce rates, suicide rates, domestic violence rates, child abuse rates, so that we actually have real data. And I'd like your thoughts and recommendations on whether we should do a survey that's unique to families, or at least add spouses to the biannual survey of military sexual assault.
Our association would prefer to see a separate survey because domestic violence is sometimes different than sexual assault. And as the services discussed earlier, especially with the family advocacy program, the outcomes when there's counseling and families work together, the outcomes are better. So, and a lot of times in domestic violence, you want to see that both partners want to save the marriage and improve the situation. So I think a separate survey would be beneficial.
So how I'd like to respond to that is to suggest that the more data we have, the better off we are. I chose to emphasize military children a bit in my opening statement because honestly, one of the communities that I am most concerned about are our military children. We often look for precedent related to how to think about supporting, whether it's our service members, our spouses, our children. What we fail, I think, or have failed to consider is there is no precedent relative to the past 15 years. You know, I talked about the 45th birthday of the all-volunteer force. The past 15 years have been the first extended test of the all-volunteer force. And what we understood after Vietnam, even after the first Gulf War, there is no precedent for going to Fort Drum, for example, and talking to a soldier who's been in for 10 years and has been deployed 5 times, and talking to that soldier's child who, might be 6 or 7 years old, and for 2 or even 3 of those years has been without a parent. It's shocking to me that we have not invested more in looking at the impact of these stressors on military children. I think we have to do it over time because there is no safety net for them. For the veterans, there is the VA. When families transition out of the military, for those children, there is no safety net. And I think that we will be in for a surprise as a nation, as a society, when we come to learn over time the implications of the past 15 years for those children.
My great concern is that we do this in a way that preserves the dignity and respect of the people involved. And so when my husband was active duty and I went to see the doctor, they always asked me, do you feel safe in your home? And I always thought, gee, are my neighbors who aren't in the military, are their doctors asking them that? And am I being targeted because my husband's in the military and therefore there's a veil of suspicion over it? So if there are surveys, I think it's important that we do it in a way that isn't stigmatizing and treating military people as a separate population from other Americans that are maybe somehow suspect. And I say that because who's going to do the survey? Already there's a little bit of distrust with your husband's boss's boss. So we have to make sure it's done in a way that is respectful to the people involved and respectful that many of them.
Would that lend itself then to just be part of the regular DoD survey?
Well, I think it's not a popular survey. It gets about a 2% response rate, that survey. I think this is another place you want to look at public-private partnerships to have people who are more in tune to the right kinds of questions.
Well, the RAND Corporation does the survey for the Department of Defense, and they implement it. All service members are supposed to fill it out, and then they extrapolate from that an estimate of how many cases.
Right, and I know a lot of people don't take it or choose not to answer it because there's a certain distrust about it. I felt it myself. I felt that distrust about was it really private? So I think this is just the reality that you need to know. When you observe a population, you change it, right? And so if the person who's observing is seen as being an official body, you may or may not get the data that you hope to get. I'm offering this as
it's a tough question then.
Right. I do think
so. What is a trusted source if you were trying to get to the data that Michael wants to get to?
Right.
Are these kids suffering? How many kids are subject to child abuse? How many have suicidal ideation? How many are at risk? How much domestic violence? What's the percentage of divorce? Like, if you want to get to that information, because the military, unfortunately, doesn't do anything until they have data. And so if they don't see the problem, they're not going to fix it. Like, They just are going to say the problem doesn't exist. And so I can't fix these problems unless I can prove to the DOD and my colleagues that they exist. And so I need data to prove they exist. So I need data, but I obviously don't want data that's not accurate, and I don't want it to be used to bludgeon the military, because that's not the point. The point is, how do we protect service members, their families, and their children?
I think that using focus groups that have some engagement with something that looks, what we found from people is they want things from their friends and neighbors, and they want it from popular culture. So I would work with Sesame Street or something that seems trusted in that way. Or one of the reasons people answer Blue Star Families survey is because it's seen as being their friends and neighbor.
Maybe we could ask them to do it.
And we do actually have some data on domestic violence. I think also
thank you. And we'd like to work with you offline with our staff. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Gillibrand. I want to thank you all for being here. I think it's been a great hearing. We've gotten a lot of information. We'll have a lot more from your written testimony, and certainly the question and answer has been very helpful. I want to make sure, Ms. Haruska, the point that you made about getting the information on military family suicide, I've taken a note. We will get an answer to your question and share that with you. I want this to be the continuation of a dialogue as we go into the NDA and we continue to work on policies after the NDA. So you have an open invitation to work with the committee staff and with my staff, and I'm sure I speak for Senator Gillibrand. We want your feedback. I also want to move that any outside statements received in the, that we include any outside statements received in the official record for this hearing without objection. So moved. So thank you again for being here and for your personal and professional interest in this issue. Thank you for your service to a very important population in our community. This meeting's adjourned.